By the age of 9, he was already showing signs of something deeply disturbing. By 16, all of Buenos Aires was talking about him. He wasn't a man, he was a skinny, quiet, and dangerous boy. This is the true story of Argentina's child serial killer, Cayetano Santos Godino, El Petiso Orejudo. Cayetano Santos Godino was born on October 31, 1896 in Buenos Aires. He was the fourth child of a poor Italian immigrant couple who lived in extreme hardship. His father, a violent alcoholic with a criminal record, had been imprisoned multiple times and, as later revealed, suffered from advanced-stage syphilis, a disease that, in those days, could also affect one's children from birth. Cayetano grew up in an environment riddled with deprivation, not just financial but emotional. The family lived in a single rented room inside a conventio, a type of tenement housing in the Parque Patricios neighborhood, a harsh setting where daily life was filled with shouting, hunger, and filth. From an early age, the neighbors began to take notice, not because he was charming, but because of his erratic and unsettling behavior. Reports say that as early as age 3, he would have sudden violent outbursts. He was aggressive toward other children and showed a strange fascination with fire. He didn't talk much, but he observed everything and acted when no one was watching. By age 5, several strange incidents had already been linked to him. One neighbor found his cat dead, clearly tortured. There was no proof, of course. But whenever Cayetano passed by, the man would cast a suspicious glance as if he knew. Another neighborhood boy, after playing with Cayetano in a vacant lot, came home bleeding with torn clothes and no clear explanation of what had happened. Cayetano's excuses were always vague. He fell, he tripped, it wasn't him. The problem was that his appearance didn't inspire fear. He was smaller than other children his age, spoke with a soft voice and seemed more fragile than threatening. But beneath that innocent facade lurked something far darker. Something not even his own parents could fully comprehend. Cayetano's first visible obsession was fire. At the age of 7, he began collecting matches, stealing them from stores, kitchens, and even digging them out of the trash. He was mesmerized by the way paper burned, by the flicker of flames. The wooden boards crackled beneath the heat. Cayetano had begun setting small fires, first in courtyards, vacant lots, and behind the conventios. Initially, these blazes posed little threat, but gradually their intensity escalated. On one occasion, he set fire to an abandoned warehouse. Firefighters arrived just in time to avert a catastrophe. No one directly accused him, yet he stood amidst the gathering crowd, watching with a strange blend of excitement and nervous energy that no one could quite interpret. By that age, he had already stopped attending school regularly. His parents, rather than correcting his behavior, simply ignored it. His mother worked as a house cleaner, while his father rarely spent any time at home. Supervision was non-existent. Cayetano had complete freedom to roam the streets of Buenos Aires. During his wanderings, he often approached other children and invited them to play. Sometimes he lured them to isolated areas, far from the presence of adults. There, his behavior became unsettling. These were not innocent games. He threw stones, pushed, and hit the other children without provocation. In one particularly disturbing incident, he even tried to suffocate a child using the boy's own hat, pressing it against his face while laughing. In 1906, at just 10 years old, he was arrested for the first time. Authorities had found him standing in the middle of a smoldering lot, a box of matches in hand. He was taken to the police station, but the consequences were minimal. His father paid a fine and took him home with nothing more than a warning. That same year, his violent tendencies became even more apparent. In a testimony collected years later, a neighbor recounted witnessing Cayetano relentlessly beating a dog with a stick for no discernible reason. When asked what he was doing, Cayetano replied, "I want to see what happens if I keep hitting it." These behaviors became patterns: animal cruelty, arson, physical aggression toward other children, compulsive lying, eerie smiles, and a fixed, unsettling gaze. At the time, the concept of childhood psychopathy did not exist in Argentina, and despite all this, Cayetano was still regarded as just another troubled neighborhood boy, a difficult child perhaps, but nothing more. Most of the attacks were never reported. Those who did know something chose to remain silent. In these impoverished neighborhoods, everyone had their own struggles, and many believed it best not to get involved. What no one realized was that their silence was giving Cayetano exactly what he needed: time to experiment, time to escalate, time to evolve. By 1908, Cayetano was only 12 years old, but he was already known in the neighborhood for his bizarre behavior. Around that time, one of the first documented attacks, officially recorded, took place. Yet like so much in this case, It was either downplayed or completely ignored. A 2-year-old boy named Miguel de Pauli was found crying in the street with a head injury. His mother discovered him disoriented and bleeding. The child couldn't clearly explain what had happened, but among the few words he managed to say, one name stood out: Cayetano. The mother immediately went to confront him. He denied everything, smiling as if he didn't grasp the seriousness of the accusation. She reported the incident to the police, but the complaint went nowhere. The official version claimed the child had simply fallen, that there were no witnesses, and that it wasn't worth pursuing further. Thus, the incident was dismissed as an isolated occurrence. But for Cayetano, it was a victory. He had caused harm, and no one had stopped him. And when punishment never arrives, the impulse is destined to repeat itself. In the following months, several children in the neighborhood began reporting similar incidents: bruises, struggles, rough games that ended in injury. Some came home with marks around their necks. Others claimed someone had tried to lure them into an empty lot or an abandoned shed. The pattern was always the same. A strange boy with a stern expression would approach, speaking softly, coaxing them away from familiar surroundings. Once alone, something would happen: hitting, pushing, strangling. Yet there was never concrete evidence, and Cayetano always had a ready excuse. Sometimes he blamed another child. Other times he insisted they were just playing, or that the entire story was a lie. In one alarming incident, he led an 18-month-old boy named Severino Gonzalez Calo to a vacant lot, threw him to the ground, tied a cord around his neck and attempted to strangle him. The child screamed, but no one was nearby. Fortunately, a woman passing by heard the cries, rushed over, and rescued the boy. When she confronted Cayetano, she found him standing nearby, observing the scene with a blank expression, detached, as if unaware of what had just transpired. He didn't flee. He didn't apologize. He simply watched. Once again, he was taken to the police station. And once again, he was released. Authorities said he was too young, that no serious crime had been committed, and that little could be done. What they failed to understand was that Cayetano wasn't acting randomly. He was learning. He was experimenting. He was rehearsing. By this age, he had already attempted to strike, suffocate, tie up, and burn smaller children. He carried out these acts in various locations, at different times and under assorted pretenses, as if conducting a series of clinical trials. And yet he remained free. But on September 29, 1908, everything changed. A 3-year-old boy named Julio Bot disappeared. He had been missing from his home for several hours before they found him, unconscious, lying among bricks and wooden planks in a vacant lot, his head badly injured. He was alive, but barely. The young boy was rushed to a hospital where thankfully he managed to recover. When he was finally able to speak, he said that a boy with big ears had taken him out to play. Cayetano was arrested once again. But since the child had survived, authorities dismissed it as a mere prank. They took down his information and released him. This time, however, his family began to feel alarmed. They sent him to a reform school. He stayed there for only a few months. There was no diagnosis, no psychological evaluation. No one knew what to do with him. In 1911, he was released and returned to his home. And as soon as he was back on the streets, things began to spiral further out of control. Between 1911 and 1912, Buenos Aires began to experience a string of small fires, mostly in conventios and storage sheds. In every case, the origin was unclear, and no suspects were identified. But a pattern was emerging. The fires always started with everyday items: mattresses, paper, wood, and always in neighborhoods inhabited by working-class families. The police had no leads, but the neighbors had begun to whisper. They claimed to have seen El Petiso Orejudo lurking nearby. He was always present near the flames, never helping, just watching. Cayetano was growing more confident. He no longer confined his actions to abandoned lots. Now he ventured into courtyards, stairwells, and the dark corridors of tenement buildings. He carried matches, sought out the youngest children, invited them to play, and then tried to harm them. Sometimes they managed to escape, sometimes they didn't, and no one seemed able to stop him. December 1912. The summer heat in Buenos Aires was oppressive. In the working-class districts, children played on the sidewalks while adults rested indoors or worked long hours. Cayetano was now 15 years old, though he still appeared younger, frail, with dull eyes and prominent ears. No one suspected that he was about to commit his first confirmed murder. On December 26th, a 3-year-old boy named Jesus Garro went missing. His frantic mother alerted the neighbors, and they searched for hours. Eventually, they found him. Lying at the back of an abandoned house, his body motionless on the ground, his head crushed beneath a heavy wooden board. He was no longer breathing. The scene was brutal. yet everything about it suggested the killer had used not strength, but method. The child's body bore no signs of struggle. The attack had been swift and calculated, and beside him, someone had left a small package. That same day, Cayetano had been seen loitering around the abandoned house. A neighbor even recalled greeting him as he passed by. When questioned by police, Cayetano claimed he had gone there to look for some nails, but he had no nails, no tools, only a box of matches. Lacking solid evidence, authorities released him once again. The death of Jesus Garro did nothing to deter him. In fact, it seemed to embolden him. Over the following weeks, reports of attempted strangulations and brief child disappearances began to surge. The missing children were later found dazed, beaten, or bearing ligature marks around their necks. Sometimes he used wire, other times rope. On one occasion, he pretended to play a hanging game using a cord tied to a nail while the other children laughed, unaware of the danger. In another instance, he attempted to kill a child by smashing a brick over his head. On yet another, he doused a boy in alcohol and set his clothes on fire. Though none of these children died, they were left with lasting physical and psychological scars. Perhaps the most chilling element was the way he carried out these attacks, without haste, without panic, as though it were part of a routine. He always chose younger victims. He always acted when no one was watching. And when he was caught, he stood still, blank-faced, as if he couldn't grasp what he had done wrong. On December 3, 1912, just weeks before Christmas in the neighborhood of Parque de los Patricios, 3-year-old Arturo Larrera was playing on the sidewalk. Cayetano approached him and offered to show him some horses. Trusting, the boy followed. They walked to a deserted lot. Without uttering a word, Cayetano tied the child with a rope, placed a heavy stone on his chest, and then set fire to the area between the boy's legs. Arturo screamed. The rising smoke drew the attention of nearby neighbors. Several rushed to the scene. When they arrived, they found Arturo unconscious but still alive, suffering from severe burns. Cayetano was caught calmly walking away just a few meters from the lot. This time, there were multiple witnesses. There was no doubt about his involvement. He was taken to the police station and formally detained. But the most astonishing moment was yet to come. During interrogation, Cayetano confessed with eerie composure. Not only did he admit to trying to kill Arturo Larrera, he also confessed to several other assaults. Most horrifyingly, he admitted to the murder of Jesus Garro weeks earlier. The police were stunned. Cayetano described the events in chilling detail, as though recounting a mundane anecdote, without remorse, without emotion. He confessed to attempting to set several houses on fire, admitting that he enjoyed watching the flames and found amusement in seeing people run in panic. He even described the methods he used in disturbing detail. Cayetano targeted younger children because they were easier to manipulate. He would lure them to secluded places, entertain them for a while, and then launch his attack. To the police, he was deeply disturbed mind. To the neighbors, he was nothing short of a monster. With all these confessions, particularly with the Arturo Larrera case still fresh, the authorities could no longer turn a blind eye to the threat he posed. Cayetano was sent to a psychiatric institution for evaluation. After observing him, the doctors reached a consensus. He suffered from severe cognitive impairment, displayed behavioral issues from an early age, and exhibited extreme cruelty without any trace of remorse. Yet at the same time, he was fully aware of his actions, capable of manipulation, deception, and escape. In short, he knew what he was doing, even if he felt no guilt for it. The court declared him unfit to stand trial. He would not be judged as an adult, but neither would he be set free. Cayetano was committed to the Hospicio de los Mercedes, an asylum where he would spend the rest of his life. Following his confession and multiple psychiatric evaluations, Cayetano, then just 16-year-old, was institutionalized at the Hospicio de los Mercedes in Buenos Aires. Although he was a teenager, his appearance remained that of a frail, withdrawn child. Many believed that his confinement marked the end of the danger, but they were wrong. The facility where he was sent was not a modern mental health center. It was an overcrowded asylum housing a wide range of patients, from individuals with severe psychiatric disorders to criminally insane inmates declared unfit for trial. The conditions were dire. The staff lacked both the resources and time to provide individualized care. Cayetano was placed in a ward with adult patients. His age did not grant him protection, nor was he handled with care. He was seen as dangerous but also small and easy to control. So in the beginning, he was largely ignored. That would prove to be a grave mistake. In his first few months at the Hospicio, Cayetano appeared unusually calm. He didn't cause disturbances, barely spoke, walked quietly through the corridors and often sat alone. But the other patients began to notice him. Many of them, adult men with histories of violence or psychotic episodes, they viewed him as an oddity, a strange boy who could be pushed around, shouted at, or dismissed. But over time, the wardens began to notice something far more chilling. One of the patients who shared a room with Cayetano was found. He complained of severe abdominal pain and claimed that someone had placed shards of ground glass in his food. The staff dismissed it as an unfounded suspicion. But days later, another inmate fell ill, this time from having swallowed a small nail. There were no cameras and no evidence, yet suspicions quickly converged on the same individual. The thin, quiet boy who rarely spoke but was always nearby. Cayetano appeared to be doing what he had done on the outside, testing, watching, and harming, without ever being caught directly. Among the institution's records is one particularly disturbing incident that left a deep impression on those who witnessed it. One of the patients had a small cat, allowed by the wardens because its presence helped calm several of the inmates. The animal was gentle, well-known, and widely adored. One morning it was found dead, hanged with wire behind a wardrobe in the ward. Cayetano was discovered standing nearby, silently observing the scene. He didn't say a word, he simply smiled. Later, it was discovered that he had plucked the wings off several birds from the asylum's inner courtyard and hidden them in a box under his bed. When asked why he did it, he replied, "I wanted to see if they could still fly." That was the breaking point for some of the staff. Cayetano was no longer seen as just a confined youth. He was someone who continued to seek out suffering, even without provocation, even in captivity. What no one expected was that even inside a locked institution, Cayetano would kill again. Years after his admission, an older, stronger inmate began harassing him regularly, taunting him in the hallways and playing cruel pranks. Cayetano never responded. Until one day, without warning, he grabbed a loose metal rod from a structure in the garden and drove it into the man's neck. The man died instantly. By the time the wardens intervened, it was too late. Cayetano offered no resistance. He didn't shout, didn't panic. He simply stood there, staring calmly at the body. He was placed in solitary confinement for months. During that time, he didn't speak to anyone, made no requests, ate very little, and barely slept. The asylum's director requested a transfer to another facility, but no institution was willing to accept him. No one wanted to take responsibility for such a young inmate with such a horrifying record. For more than a decade, Cayetano remained at the Hospicio de las Mercedes under intermittent supervision. His case was unique. He had never been sentenced by a regular court, yet there was no possibility of release. His parents visited occasionally, though the relationship was strained. His mother said she didn't understand what was wrong with him. His father, who had beaten him for years, called him God's punishment. Neither accepted any responsibility. Over the years, Cayetano's physical health steadily declined. He frequently fell ill, and his mobility deteriorated significantly. Yet according to medical records, his mind remained as cold and detached as ever. He never asked for help. He never expressed remorse. Not once did he speak of regret. Cayetano Santos Godino died in the asylum of Ushuaia on November 15, 1944. He was 48 years old and had been institutionalized since the age of 16. During the last 2 decades of his life, he was transferred from Buenos Aires to the infamous prison at the end of the world, the Presidio Nacional de Ushuaia, a maximum security penitentiary located in the remote southern reaches of Tierra del Fuego. Unlike the Hospicio de las Mercedes, this facility was even harsher, colder, more isolated, and designed less for treatment than for total separation from society. His final years were marked by physical decline. He suffered from severe gastrointestinal issues, likely the result of prolonged malnutrition, confinement, and possible acts of self-harm. But the most widely accepted version of his death is not medical, it is violent. According to reports from that time, he was murdered by fellow inmates. It is said that he had killed a cellmate's pet bird, a small creature that had provided the inmate with a rare source of comfort and companionship. That act allegedly triggered a fatal beating. He was supposedly struck repeatedly until he died inside the cell block. However, no official criminal case was ever opened regarding his death. Other less popular versions claim he simply died of natural causes, frail, alone, and forgotten. But that narrative never took hold in the public imagination. What's most disturbing is what happened after his death. Cayetano was buried in a local cemetery. Years later, during renovation work, his grave was desecrated. His skull was stolen, allegedly for scientific study, and according to some records, it ended up at the University of Buenos Aires Medical School. For decades, rumors circulated that Godino's skull was used as a specimen in criminology or forensic anthropology lectures. Others claimed it was eventually destroyed. To this day, the final fate of his remains remains unknown. The mystery surrounding his body only added to his dark legend. Though he had died long ago, Cayetano's story continued to stir fear and morbid fascination. Over time, the tale of Cayetano Santos Godino morphed into an urban legend in Buenos Aires. Parents would warn misbehaving children with phrases like, "Behave," or "El Petiso Orejudo will come for you." The nickname, originally a cruel joke about his appearance, had become something far more enduring and ominous. He remains one of the most sinister names in Argentina's criminal history. His case has been referenced by criminologists, historians, writers, and even filmmakers. Numerous books cite him as the country's first known child serial killer. Others portray him as the tragic product of an upbringing defined by neglect, ignorance, and violence. But beyond the myth, the most disturbing element is still the reality of his story. A working-class boy with the face of a victim who began harming others at the age of 7 and never stopped, whether in freedom or confinement.